What if you could find work that was meaningful, but didn't come with a standard toxic corporate workplace culture? At Palm Tree, we think we have exactly that, and our colleagues would agree. We're a consulting firm focused on the world of private equity and M&A. We do good work, and we're proud of that. But we also invest heavily into building a people-first culture. The investment in our people has resulted in high retention numbers across the firm since we started in 2010. If accounting, strategy, analytics, banking, and working with the world's smartest and kindest people sounds like the kind of work you'd enjoy, consider applying for a role at Palm Tree. Visit our careers page at palmtreellc.com or find the link in this episode's show notes for more information.
Standing out in a crowded field of consulting career seekers takes more than just a good resume or a solid case prep strategy. I'm really excited to share this panel with you, where we bring on 5 leading business schools to share how they prep their students for consulting success. We're hearing from Columbia Business School, Northwestern Kellogg, Indiana Kelley, Michigan Ross, and the Rotman School of Management. They all share some really fantastic advice, strategies, mindsets, and mistakes to avoid to land yourself a consulting offer. If you represent a university or consulting club, reach out to learn more about a group workshop for your students to prep them for case interviews. There's a link in the show notes where you can learn more and to schedule a call with a member of our team. Lastly, if you enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to help more people find the show. All right, let's get into this panel on standing out in a crowded field.
We're excited to introduce our panelists for today. We have an amazing lineup, and thank you in advance, panelists, for joining us. We're going to walk through these different panelists and have them introduce themselves to you, their school, the program, and kind of what they do currently to support students in consulting. Columbia Business School, you're up first.
Thank you. I'm Joni Coughlin. I am one of the 7 advisors here at Columbia Business School focused on our full-time MBA students, which is about a class of 700. We have first years who go through the consulting process up to 240 who apply. So we've got a full house. I am the advisor who is the liaison to our Management Consulting Association, and I work with Management Consulted to help lay out what our consulting prep curriculum is. So thank you for having me today.
Joni, we're so glad to have you. Thanks for joining. Kelley.
Thanks, Jenny. My name is Scott Loeffner. So I've spent 5 years at Kelley. Before that, I spent 30 years in the consulting industry, all of it at Accenture. So I probably bring a little different angle to a lot of the questions that may be asked today. In the last 5 years, I've sort of become responsible for preparing all our MBA students, roughly a class size of around 200, I think. Those that are choosing consulting paths, I am the faculty director for our consulting academy. I also oversee our GLOBASE program, which is the global consulting, I'll call them student projects, and then One Kelley, which is the undergrad consulting projects for students as well. So I think I've kind of sort of settled into all things consulting for the grads and undergrads at Kelley.
Thanks, Scott. So glad to have you. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Kellogg.
Hi, I'm Megan Thomas. I am one of our career coaches on staff, but I also work closely with our library resource team as well as our career education team. So some of our workshops and things like that. Prior to being a career coach, I was actually on our employer relations team. We actually manage the relationships with the firms, the consulting firms that we work with.
Amazing. And Megan, do you support just full-time, just for everybody's understanding?
Yes, thank you. I the full-time MBA. Yes, there's about 700 students in our second year class, and we've got about 600 in our first year class.
Okay, awesome. No small feat. We're so glad to have you. Excited for you to share. Yeah. Ross.
I'm Randy Albert from Ross. I'm the career coach, one of 6, I think, career coaches, and I'm the one focused on consulting. We have about 400 full-time MBAs in each class. Plus, we support a number of part-time MBAs in both the online and weekend programs that we have. Before Ross, I was a senior manager at Deloitte, an associate partner at Accenture, and the managing partner of a boutique firm so I spent a good 20 years in consulting before Ross. And at Deloitte, one of the side jobs I had was the regional advanced degree recruiting lead. So well steeped in this industry. Our support system at Ross is really robust. I hire about 25 peer coaches who all landed consulting internships and run weekly small group recruiting prep meetings in coordination with weekly consulting club education sessions. And in addition, I communicate weekly with the students in the consulting prep groups and maintain a robust web page of self-created and carefully curated commercial resources like Management Consulted. And then finally, the peer coaches, a former BCG partner, and I all take individual coaching appointments for things like resume reviews and mock cases.
Amazing. Thank you. Love that detail. You can see the consulting background with all that data you shared. Love it. Thanks, Randy. Awesome. And last but not least, Rotman.
I'm with the Rotman School of Management, University of Toronto, supporting both full-time and morning and evening students. I've been a career coach for the past 12 years, supporting students one-on-one. I'm one of 7 coaches on the team who all the students have designated coaches to help them support their 2-year career journey. And also with our corporate relations team, who deepen our relationships with our consulting partners and to help bring in industry insights, as well as our close partnership with Management Consulted, who does the live webinars for our students to help them build out their case framework, as well as their one-on-one coaching through their talented coaches for their case prep.
Love it. Thank you, Betty. And thank you, everyone, for that amazing introduction. I want to go through for everybody just a little bit of a sense of the follow-up questions. We're going to talk about the programs that you have. That'll be our first question. Some of you alluded to them, and I was struck as we were hearing from you how different everyone's programs are. So if you can also maybe just share a little bit about if you have a typical background of your student that you're working to support. I know that there will be some different student audiences that you represent, so that might help everyone understand, kind of where people are going and where they're interested in. We're going to talk about differentiation and how you assess student fit. So I'm going to dive into those questions. The first question is for CBS. And for Kelley. So Joni and Scott, can you share an example of an effective program or structure that you've created to help students succeed in consulting recruiting? Feel free to go into detail on calendars, schedules, support structures, everything like that. Joni, would you like to go first?
Sure. Yes. And, as far as you asked for us to share more detail on kind of what the background is of our students, and I would say we have a pretty standard MBA population, but we are incredibly diverse in terms of we have up to 50% international students, and I am one of the liaisons to our international students. So not only do I work with domestic students, but I work a lot with international students. And, for students who haven't worked in the US, that's something we work on. If you want to jump right into consulting in the US, as your first job, and I can talk through some of those details as a follow-up question. But, in general, what is our structure? And I would say CBS is very personalized. Randy talked a bit about what they did at Ross and how there is the combination of both advisors and also, or kind of the management, the career management center, and then also the student club. And I would say those are our 2 big pillars. And so within the career management office, that's where I am. We start with advising one-on-one prior to you coming to business school. So once you get here, it's quite quick. We have orientation the 3rd week in August, and we've got companies on campus for consulting the 4th week in September. And so if you want to be in for consulting, we need to have conversations prior to your matriculation, ideally. Not everyone does, but ideally. And so we begin with welcome advising, having customized conversations as far as where are you at in the process. Maybe some people have been to pre-MBA programs at some of the big firms, and so they already have a better idea. Other people may be like, I want to be a consultant, but they have no idea what consultants do. And so that's kind of our first. We additionally have students who we call them fellows. So they also do advising appointments. That's once you get going. And I would say the big kickoff with that are these, we call them career groups, where we have one second year who did an internship in consulting with maybe a ratio about 8 students straight away the second week you're at school. What's the timeline look like? What, did they do that was successful? And these are things that I would have already talked to you about ideally in welcome advising. But if I've missed you in this, you didn't sign up for your appointment, we've got another way to get you with the information. Okay. And so advisors and fellows are doing one-on-one sessions. What's your resume look like? What's your pitch? Can you articulate how you add value to consulting and why you want to do it? And then we also eventually help you with behavioral interviews and the prep for that later on, and say coffee chat prep. Separately, what we're coordinating from the Career Management Center are kind of mass consulting casing prep things in terms of robust online resources. We're going to make sure you have those even before you get to school, as well as we do a capstone case workshop with management consulted, but we're also, I'll give you a reason later on why we're going to get started a bit earlier in terms of we're going to be doing a kickoff the beginning of October based on what we're hearing from firms in terms of that they want you to be warm with where you're at with your casing the second week in November. That's early, but anyway, that's what they want. Separately, we have the professional club, the Management Consulting Association. They have casing buddies, or I should say second year buddies to help you through the process. They do a lot of case workshops between kind of this kickoff and at the end, what are our frameworks, et cetera. But we have a pretty robust and complementary curriculum.
Amazing. It seems like it moves earlier and earlier every year, doesn't it? It's like, come to business school, learn all about all the business things.
It was one of the big firms. I had a pushback with them this week. I said, we want students to peak the first week of January, but you're telling us, you want them warm in November. That doesn't seem like it matches. But anyway, we serve at the pleasure. So gotta make sure people are ready.
Thanks, Joni. Thanks for adding that color. I think that's amazing. And also, I'm a CBS alum, so I can speak to the power of that process. Yeah. Thanks, Scott. Let's go to you. We really enjoy working with the Consulting Academy. I'd love to hear a little bit more and have people share a little bit more about what you do there.
Sure. So much like Columbia, like I think I find our class to be incredibly diverse. It's getting more so every year, it seems. I also see the need for the students to be read earlier and earlier. I think I want to say like 15% of my class this year walked onto campus with their internships already in the bag. They got them in summer intern programs, consortium. Like the cycle is starting so much earlier. I used to think January, then I was thinking October. Now I'm thinking like literally we actually have a pre-call with them in May. Okay. And you guys help us with that, right? Like we've realized that once they've signed on and they're part of our program, we need to start getting them ready for the consulting growth because it starts. And I explain to the students that, consulting firms are always on, having done recruiting and sat on the other side of the table for 30 years, we're always assessing. Okay. Like there are no informal conversations. So, a lot of it is just getting the students ready to perform their very best, during networking, interviewing, and those kinds of things. I think in particular, as it pertains to getting them ready to be successful in recruiting, I just started by reverse engineering the process. I talked to all the recruiters and asked, what did you like about our students? What do you dislike? Where do we shine? Where are we a little duller, so to speak? And what I found was that a number of the students, especially the international students, didn't really understand the essence of the jobs they were interviewing for. Like they knew they were interviewing for consulting, but not necessarily the intricacies of strategy during versus management consulting versus MSIS or IT oriented, or systems integration consulting roles. So a lot of what I've done is structure the program to educate the students really well on the differences between the different types of consulting. And I rely on the consulting firms to help me do that. They all come in for about half a day through the course of the early part of the fall, talk about their programs and gives them a chance to differentiate and start the networking process. Much like Columbia, we have a very intense casing process. I think we bring management consulted in, I think roughly 3 times for the first years, and then another time for second year students that are going to re-recruit. So we're all in on it, not only just for consulting, but what we've found is that case interviewing is important on all the other disciplines as well. I think 80% of our interns last year did case interviews, whether they were going to Procter and Gamble or Eli Lilly or wherever. Everyone's using the case interview now. So we do a lot with that prep. And then really the other thing I think I spend probably a good bit of my time on is teaching them the process of consulting. I don't see it as our role to teach them corporate strategy or finance or any of those things. They're all getting it in the core. Almost every MBA program has some sort of a core component to it. But I spend a lot of time and rely on some other couple other faculty members to really teach the students how to use what they're learning in the core in a consulting environment. So I kind of think of it almost as an umbrella that sits over the top of the core. And I do that. We have kind of a semester-long progressive case. You think of it as like a progressive dinner almost, where you go from one house to the other. This is the same thing. We start with scoping a project, estimating it, pricing it. Then we work with two of the big consulting firms that come in and play the role of mock client. It culminates in them making a presentation, and it's kind of a contest-oriented thing. So it's a really good chance for them to go through, I think, everything from soup to nuts on a kind of a really good example of a consulting project. So I think between that, the casing, and getting them educated on what the subtleties are in terms of making sure they really understand the kind of roles they're interviewing for, because I think the mistake I saw early with a lot of the students was that they didn't know how to talk about their past in the context of a consulting career. Right? Everybody that's getting an MBA is pivoting. I mean, if they were making fat stacks and loved their job, they wouldn't be getting an MBA, right? So the reality is they're all trying to figure out how to take what they've done for 4, 5, 6 years, whatever it is, and put a little spin on it. And in particular, I work a lot with the military students because they're horrible at taking what I think are really great project management kind of like experiences and putting them in the context that resonates with a person that's been at Deloitte for 8 years and doesn't know anything about the military. So really, it's about kind of just getting the students ready to perform well during the interview cycle.
Scott, can you just add one more thing, just because I know about what y'all do at the program about your Friday structure? I think that's valuable for people to know.
Yeah.
One of the questions we get a lot, even from non-students, is like, how frequently should I be prepping, or how often should I be doing this? So can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So through the fall, roughly, I see the students, they're sort of dedicated to me for 8 hours a day on about every other Friday. So I get them essentially for like 6 to 7 Friday full days, where we're focused on, again, kind of augmenting all those things they're learning in the core and shaping them. And the same thing is going on there's someone who has a position much like mine in marketing and finance, and there's other disciplines as well. But again, I see consulting as sort of this lost function. Okay, like hardly anybody has a major or minor called consulting. You look at most people's list of classes, and there's 3 that have the word consulting in them. You look at that same list and put in marketing, and like 50 courses come up. So it's an area where there's really very little content that is delivered in a structured way. So I think what I've done is really just built essentially a curriculum around those Fridays to get the students ready to, again, use all those things they're learning in the core on their internships.
Are you considering a consulting role, but you're not sure if you have the right experience? Then join Strategy Sprint for a 1-week virtual consulting project that will help you add amazing US-based work experience to your resume. And until April 26th, you'll get $200 off the next Strategy Sprint project for an early bird discount. See the link in the show notes to get the discount and to join Strategy Sprint. Just a few more quick details about the project. In Strategy Sprint, you're staffed in a team of 6 led by a former McKinsey, Bain, or BCG consultant, and your job is to answer a strategic or growth question for a real client. In the project, you'll not only confirm if consulting is right for you, you'll gain incredible US work experience for your resume. And as a bonus, we'll even help you add the experience to your resume. Again, link in the show notes to learn more and to sign up for Strategy Sprint.
I'm going to move over to the R's, to Ross and Rotman now. And I'd like to ask about the differentiators when you're taking the students and matching them up with the firms. Students that stand out, what do they have? What are they demonstrating? What do they do? What makes them different to help them be successful? So Betty, I'll have you go first. What is the greatest differentiator you're instilling in your students to navigate the consulting landscape right now?
I want to say something that Scott just said, and it would be storytelling. How are you connecting the dots to consulting from your previous working experience to what you're doing now? I'm going to give you an example. I had a student come into the program with a liberal arts background, and he was a chef that wanted to get into consulting. And so we used how he was able to put out fires and in the kitchen to how he went to his customers to see how they're enjoying. So that would be in his client, and build that into into a storytelling that would make it effective. And he did successfully land in consulting post MBA. So I would have to say one of the differentiators is, what are you bringing and how are you going to tell your story?
Yeah, totally agree.
That's amazing. Randy, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, my answer is really similar. I think it's the greatest differentiator is our students who are really able to be themselves throughout the process and bring their accumulated wisdom to the table when they're casing, instead of treating casing like an academic exercise where they're trying to pass a test, where they just show that they've got demonstrating good problem solving skills that they already have, and using their accumulated wisdom to show that they've got good common sense and can connect the dots with things they've done before. Those are the students that figure that out are the ones that successful. The ones that try to present themselves as something they think the consulting firms want to see and try to go through the cases in a formulaic way tend not to be successful.
Randy, I feel like you probably could speak to this too, but we're seeing the firms work to innovate about how they're asking those questions to test for that, right? They're not just asking the prepared questions that everyone's expecting. They're asking you, how you would build something from the ground up, or why we shouldn't hire you instead of why we should, right? They're kind of flipping the script a little bit. I don't know if you have anything specific like that you want to speak to, but I'm guessing that you're seeing that pretty consistently like we are, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely seeing that. And I guess the thing underlying that, Jenny, that I'm always struggling to figure out is, I don't know why it's so hard to convey to students what the real evaluation criteria are. I use the analogy of learning to ride a bicycle, that, when you're first learning to ride a bicycle, you're focused on pedaling and steering. But as soon as you figure out the pedaling and steering, you never think about them again. But I feel like students spend all of their prep time trying to perfect the pedaling and steering, rather than just letting their stories come through, right?
Good.
You get the pedaling and steering down. That's not that complicated.
It's so good. Yeah. That's amazing insight. And we see the mixture, right? We see some people who haven't got the pedaling and steering down and want to rely on the story to overcome that. But then we also see the bigger problem that we see is the one that you're mentioning, which is that people think that the process is more formulaic than it actually is, whereas the entry to the process is, but then it goes way beyond that.
But I agree with you. The firms are absolutely figuring out ways to sort of give students better opportunities to demonstrate what they're really looking for and try to keep them off that sort of mechanical process stuff. Absolutely.
Yeah. We see that all the time. Great. Let's we can move on now to the next question, which is I'll start with Kellogg for this one, and then Scott, I'll go back to you for Kelley. How do you handle students that think they're a fit for consulting but aren't?
We'll be right back after this quick break.
Have you ever heard a new digital trend and thought to yourself, okay, does this really matter? Asking the right questions helps you cut through the noise and get down to what matters most. I'm Jim Hertzfeld, host of the What If, So What podcast, where we discover what's possible with digital and figure out how to make it real by asking what if, so what, and most importantly, now what? Subscribe and listen, and together we can turn big ideas into tangible actions so you can get shit done.
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you so much for sharing. I think one of the things that I oftentimes, in those moments that, I think that a student may not be right for consulting, I might share with them that they need to discover, reach out to the companies on their own or go to the events and really start to understand what the work looks like. When I think the student most likely isn't a good fit for consulting, it typically is because of, they might not be interested in the work. So they might be talking about, in my entry, we would meet with a student and they would be talking a lot about the ownership of the work or wanting to really get into the weeds on, launching a product or sharing different experiences about their proudest moments at work. And all of that really has this control aspect. And so then I really make sure that students are having these conversations and asking and sharing with the student. It seems like you're talking a lot about ownership. Within a lot of consulting projects, you're not on that project for very long. You will ultimately hand it off to the company. The company will be in charge of implementation of that particular project, especially within strategy consulting. And so really, probing for that, I think, is something as a career coach that I often do. And then I recommend that the students would, continue to have those conversations to get a better sense of the work with the firms themselves.
I think that's amazing. Megan, I want to probe you for this, and if you don't have it, you can just say it. But do you have an example of a student that kind of came in and they were like, consulting is the thing for me? Like, I was pre-med in undergrad, and I feel like everybody looked at you like, oh, sure you are, right? And then they helped me figure out what I actually loved. But do you have a recent story that you could share with somebody that kind of found the thing they loved that wasn't consulting?
Yeah, I actually had a student that I've been working with that he was a ex-founder, and he had spent a lot of time in startup organizations. Then he founded his own company, went back to a startup. I mean, everything just really screamed that he was into launching products. And so that was the piece of the puzzle that we really spoke a lot about, of the ownership piece. And actually, he still felt that his credentials would be stronger if he had a consulting brand on his resume. So we went for first year, we did go after, and he did go after recruiting at the consulting firms. He landed with a firm. He was really excited. And then he was pretty miserable over the summer. I had gotten a couple calls from him over the summer that was like, this doesn't feel like the right fit. I'm doing lots of PowerPoints. I thought I'd have more, conversations. It was a lot for him. And he really wanted to get, moving with the strategy. So he liked the brainstorming aspect, but then he didn't like the handoff aspect, as we sort of had predicted. But he was able to leverage his experience in a really positive way and landed at another growth stage company. And ideally, will be opening up his own organization in the next 5 or 6 years is what his plan is.
Was he not getting a lot of FaceTime with like a Fortune 50 CEO?
Yeah, I think so. I think that was what the expectation was versus,
yes.
Yeah. Someone once told me, business schools, sometimes they feel like they are, in the classroom, like they're the CEO, they're making so many decisions, and then they get to the real world, and then there's several layers up before they're making some of the strategic decisions that they're making in the classroom, which, makes sense. They've got to have, there's obviously a power of command there that they need to follow when they're in the real world. So his expectations were differed what the actual experience was.
I was shocked that we didn't just stand around large windows of skyscrapers and write things on the wall all day. When they asked me to open up Excel, I was like, I'm sorry, what? I don't even know what this is right now. So, Scott, do you want to share about that? I remember actually this year being in the room with you guys when you were kind of like, some of you need to leave the consulting academy. You need to go do something else. But how do you handle that?
So I think it varies a little depending on why I don't believe they're qualified. There's a subset of people that want to get into consulting that just probably don't have the intellectual horsepower. Okay. They're just simply not smart enough. I mean, by and large, consultants have to be at least smarter than average, right? Clients aren't going to pay 5 times more for a consultant than one of their own employees unless they bring something to the table that is special. And that happens from time to time. And those, I try to get them to unpack and, oftentimes in getting them to describe to me why they think they're qualified to do something they perhaps realize that they're not. Okay. And I think a parallel I see with that one a lot is that students want to over pivot. Okay. And I'll give you an example. Last year, I had a young lady, and she had spent 6 years doing design on detailed parts for General Motors. Like, she literally was designing brackets to hold alternators. Okay. Like, super detailed engineering stuff. And she wanted to do retail consulting. Okay. So I asked her, I specifically asked her, what will a consulting firm see in you? Okay. You don't know retail well. Okay. You don't know consulting well. Right. And the answer I got was, I'm a great shopper. Okay. I literally, she believed that shopping experience translated into being able to do, retail and merchandising and all the things consultants do with them. So I think a lot of the times it's less about talking them out of consulting and more about talking them into the right flavor of consulting. Okay. So with her, I said, why don't you get in with Deloitte or PwC or Accenture, or any one of these companies that does work with all the automakers, where your first step in, you can add value. On day one, you could go to a client and at least understand the industry that they're in, right? Then make it your goal over 2 or 3 years to make your way into retail, or who knows where your career will take you. But lots of times the thing I see is that they want to leave it all behind. And it's a quantum leap for a consulting firm. Again, the goal is to try to help them be successful, not only garnering the internship, but doing well in it. And if they get in and they're doing something they're just simply not qualified for, we all know how that's going to end, and it won't be well. The other thing is, so that's kind of the flavor of just probably not a right fit, maybe. And the other is, there are some people that probably don't have the right attitude for consulting. Like, they just don't understand not only the hours, but the intensity and the need for, for thoroughness. Okay. And I see it a lot. I'll see students that don't want to do thorough work. And and I explain to them that the client is emphatic about a thorough solution. Like, they don't want you to just jump to a conclusion. They want to see the whole spreadsheet and all the analytics and everything that fits behind the recommendation. So, again, it's just sort of a function of explaining to them that perhaps their chemistry or their DNA or the way they like to operate is not consistent with the expectations of what a client's going to have of a consultant.
We'll be right back after this quick break.
Hey, you. Yeah, you listening. Do you like personal finance or real estate? Are you itching to build wealth and create a better life for yourself or your family? Then you need to come check out the Life, Money, and More podcast with real estate agent, YouTuber, and actor Sage Weiss. This isn't your average finance show. We dive deep and do not sugarcoat topics around money and life. The Life, Money, and More podcast releases 2 episodes a week just for you, because we're all about helping you win in this crazy world we live in. Come join the thousands of listeners on the Life, Money, and More podcast.
Scott, I'm struck by how a career journey is similar to advice that we would give to firms, right? If we ask them to over pivot, we have to prove it in such a detailed way that it almost becomes impossible. So
it is
working with firms incrementally to say, hey, why don't you do this first, make this change, and then the next thing. It's the same with a career journey.
Do you remember like 17 to 20 years ago, like when firms were just diversifying for diversification's sake, right? It was fabulous for consulting firms. We did all kinds of M&A and integration work, right? Then we turned right around and split them all up, because they realized, when you put a paper company with a shipbuilding company, there's no synergies there, right? And a sort of a holding
you
company.
You can make them on paper, Scott. You can make
there's a shared services center, but beyond that, there's really no good synergy. So I think, again, it's sort of that same thing, like getting the students more comfortable, making an appropriate pivot, I think really is the key for us.
That's good. I'm going to move over to Randy and Megan now. So beyond table stakes, which I would call kind of your Excel modeling / analytical skills, problem solving skills, communications, what's an underestimated skill that you think makes someone a superstar candidate for consulting? You've mentioned the experience of storytelling before in the interviews, but what about just for on-the-job performance? What are some of those things that you think would be helpful for them? Megan, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I actually have thought quite a bit about this, and this is something that I think applies both in the job and in interviews. But the ability to take feedback and to learn from the feedback is something that I've heard a lot from the different firms that I've worked with. A student that comes in that is, listening to what is directly said and what is maybe sometimes indirectly said, and being able to build their skills upon it. So, if they're hearing, someone had a presentation, they should adjust their presentation, then sort of like, oh, I should also make my presentation look similar, or be thinking about that when I have my own presentation. In terms of the interviews, we often talk about, okay, if you are getting feedback from, or even the mock interview into your actual interview, what feedback did you get from the firm? And then to be extra sensitive to correct for that when you're in the interview situation. And I think that's something that ability and willingness to continue to improve upon oneself is something that's really appreciated in a function like consulting.
I love that answer. Randy, what about you?
Yeah, you get feedback several times a day in consulting. It's not just annual reviews. So
that's so true.
Absolutely true. So the one that I picked out is managing nervousness. The ability to exude confidence without arrogance, even when you're making mistakes, when you feel like an imposter is really important. So, and I just find that trips up a lot of our students as candidates. It can certainly trip up you once you're working, that, you have to instill confidence in clients, even when you don't really know where you're going and when you're not sure what path you need to take. So I think that managing nervousness is a big special skill that's not talked about very much and not apparent.
Mm-hmm. Good. I think I don't think that I realized what the age and authority gap would be between me and the client. And I feel like the ability to manage nervousness comes into play a lot when you're in a room that you really don't have any right to be in just because of the person who invited you, right?
Yeah, and we all have the tendency to treat meetings with, might be an interview with a firm or a meeting with an executive, to sort of treat them like a parent, and we go into child ego state. And clients want an adult to adult conversation. Consulting firms want an adult to adult conversation. So even if you're younger and less experienced, they still want the adult part of you rather than the child ego state showing up to have the conversation, because you can still add value thinking about something from a different angle or whatever, right? So I think that's a lot of it is, in our child ego state, it's really easy to get nervous and sort of flail around it. As adults, we're better able to manage that nervousness.
I love it. Well, last question in the moderated questions is about growing industries, geographies, or functions. I know that as universities, one of the things that you're trying to do is find students opportunities, and that landscape has certainly been shifting a lot in the last couple of years. So for Betty, I'll have you go first for this one, and then Joni at CBS. Can you just talk about a few of the places where you're seeing either firm interest, geographies, industries, even boutique areas that you're helping your students find pockets of opportunity right now? Betty, you first.
Yes, thank you. So right now in the Canadian market, we are seeing things stabilize a little bit when it comes to consulting. I think that there was a little bit of shakeup during the pandemic where they were hiring students in double digits for consulting, and there was later start dates for the most recent hires. So now we're starting to see a more of a stabilization, which is a good thing. But some of the areas of focus that we're seeing is, of course, financial services. Healthcare is also another growing area, as well as energy and sustainability. I think a lot of the boutique firms always go on tap. So I'm so glad that you brought that up, Jenny Ray, because boutique firms can really help those students that want to have a specialization. If you're going into other firms that are more generalized and you want to use some of the skills that you are bringing into consulting and have a more of a specialized area, that could take another few years to get to that specialization, whereas those boutique firms could offer that. So that's what we're seeing right now within the Canadian landscape when it comes to consulting.
Great.
Yeah,
Love it.
Sorry, thank you, Betty. I will build on that and say, we look at, the US, but also globally at CBS, and I would echo similar things in terms of, we do see most of our students going for generalist consulting, but healthcare opportunities. And a big one is sustainability, in terms of not just a ton of student interest in sustainability, in fact, across all areas, not just consulting, but then when you look at consulting, we have the firms who have sustainability focuses, et cetera. And so one thing I'll also build on, not just in terms of industries and focus areas, but regions. I think this will be one that many of the career services professionals will know, is the Middle East. The Middle East was hot this year for hiring. And so this was something I know that when I talked to many of my colleagues, this was, when students are like, I want to work in consulting, and we had to say, honestly, do we know what's happening in the US market? As Betty's talking about, similar things, we're having later start dates. It doesn't necessarily mean delayed, but for a May grad, it could be the following Q1. And so if you are, looking for limited consulting opportunities, you may want to be geographically flexible. And so a number of our students who landed full-time consulting positions without internships, many of those were in the Middle East. And so there are different, focus areas, whether it's financial services, whether it's energy, whatnot there as well, or generalist, but that's another build to what Betty was saying.
Amazing. Thank you. Let's move on now to the audience questions, and I'll read out the question and I'm going to let you volunteer for them, and I'll just ask you to share the floor, right? So once you've answered a question, we'll give other people a chance at the end. If there's one that you really wanted to weigh in on, that someone jumped in on, I'll give us a few minutes to do that. We've got 5 total questions in the audience question section. And audience, I just want to remind you, if you've got questions for our panelists, then please could you pop them in there? The first question is, could you share an example of a student who would not have had a good chance to get into consulting without business school?
I actually have a decent story for this. I actually worked with a professional soccer player. He came through Kellogg, specifically looking for consulting. He had a business sort of undergrad, and then he went and continued his dream of playing professional soccer. So when he came into Kellogg, we were really aware of the gaps that he had, having not the traditional business experience. And so he really dove into his classes, and I believe really spent a lot of time thinking about his stories and what he had learned throughout his time as a soccer player, looking at, examples of, where he was, even though his main goal was to play soccer, he was also, part of the overall club team. And so he had various pursuits within that where he was helping make some strategic decisions with the team. And so we played up that aspect. But of course, with the business school background, that's truly, and again, I think it was mentioned before, he had an extremely high GMAT score. And so I think between those two, he was able to showcase his ability to be his intellectual horsepower, as well as he was really able to network effectively. And then, of course, with sort of the soccer player, he was known as a soccer player, he was a very memorable candidate. A lot of people were aware of him, and that can be a really good thing or can be a not so good thing. But I think he really made it to be, and continue to share out the story of why he was interested in consulting and thinking about his ability of being a team captain and a leader. And I think it really worked well. And he was able to secure his internship offer that ultimately landed in full-time. But I know that because of business school and the fact that he was at Kellogg, that really made for a solid story for the firm.
Love it. Next question is, what is one thing that everyone gets wrong about consulting recruiting?
I'll take a shot at this one. So I think one of the things I see students repeatedly make the mistake in is that they have a disbelief that the recruiting manager from the consulting firm is the decision maker. Okay. And what they don't really realize is that, yeah, they're the administrator, they're running the process. They perhaps can influence which students get offers or not. But more often than not, what really happens is the folks from the consulting firm that are actually doing the interviews and having the one-on-one sessions and the networking discussions are the ones that actually make the decision. But like I've had at least a dozen students over the years where, they'll come to me and go, I can't believe I didn't get an offer. I had such a great relationship with so-and-so. And I'm like, that's interesting, but like that person wasn't making the decision. You spent your time building a relationship with somebody that is important, but is not really the decision maker.
It's a good one. Thanks, Scott.
I wouldn't mind adding to this one if it's okay.
Go ahead, Randy. Yeah, sure. Go for it.
So the mistake I think students make is treating casing like it's something that they've never done before. So yeah, I get that they may not have done case interviewing, but all you're trying to do is demonstrate that you can solve problems effectively in a structured, logical, data-driven way. And people have been doing that for their lifetimes. And they just don't seem to want to they want to treat it like something new that they learn are new. And it's like climbing Mount Everest. And I'm convinced that they spend 3 times more effort and stress getting there from that mindset than if they just embrace that they're already good problem solvers and they're just trying to demonstrate skills they already have.
Amazing. Thanks. Good way in. The next one is I'm debating going to business school or trying to get my first consulting job. What value does an MBA add in this current job market? Go direct or go through school?
I can take this one. I feel that like with their MBA, it really helps them pivot, whether it's enhancing their current job where they're currently at, or making those confident decisions as a leader in strategic thinking, for example, being able to fast track your career a little bit, having not have you like Megan's story with the soccer player, right? Not having done their MBA, would they have been able to then make that pivot still into consulting? So I think it just adds a different blend for everybody. It would be a different, but I think it'll help with the career switching, enhancement, and just overall being confident in your decision making.
Love it. Next question is, how can I be memorable in networking and behavioral interviews when I'm in consideration with other applicants with similar experiences?
So I'm happy to take a shot at this one if you'd like.
Go ahead, Scott.
I think, so having sat on the other side of the table for, I counted about once, like 1,100 interviews, because every Friday I had to do 5 of them for 30 years. One of the things that I cherished the most was somebody who would just be genuine with me. Okay. The story was often less important than how they told the story. I remember I had somebody came in and just said, I haven't really done a lot of stuff. I painted houses this summer. Okay. And I asked him, well, did you ever just have a disagreement with one of the other painters? He goes, yeah. And I mean, it was a much more genuine thing. And I got so tired of people overinflating their experiences. Okay. It was really refreshing to just have someone come in and tell me what they'd really done. And I can tell you that everybody that's been in consulting and done interviewing lives to just have a genuine, honest discussion that's not picking through the resume and figuring out which 10 words in there have been overestimated or exaggerated. And so just be yourself, and I think it's easier to tell a story that's true than to fabricate one and sound passionate about it.
I love that. Joni, did you want to weigh into? I saw you come
yeah,
off
I can build on that.
Sure.
What I think about is standing out is, first of all, what is the purpose of all this? There's so much, I want to say, manufactured interactions with the firm. So, and what is the purpose of all of that? And first, understanding that it's really to build advocates within the firm for you. And so, as Scott's saying, whether it's be authentic, I'm agreeing with that for your communication, but what is your way to connect? Because you've got to have these advocates within the firm, but what are these true, authentic connection points? And I would think, is it, it can be through an affinity group. It can be through, what your prior work experience is and how that plays in the future. So for example, I think Scott talked about the person who'd worked in automotive. So is that their way to say, yes, I want to come in as a generalist and bring this skill set, but this is what I bring from the past in automotive, and I want to make that a connection point to meet different people. And so I think it's understanding through the recruiting process, what are you doing? You're having advocates, trying to have advocates within the firms. And so what's your authentic connection point? And then, like I said, whether it's, something that's your career path, whether it's your affinity group, something like that. So I think those are other ways to stand out.
Love it. This last question I love, because when I started working with Management Consulted, we would usually work with people 3 to 5 days before an interview with McKinsey. That was kind of what we did. And now people are asking, I would say, the bigger and broader questions, like, is consulting even right for me? And how do I know? So the last question is, how does somebody know that they're ready for a career change? And how does your program facilitate that decision-making process for students? I think everyone's weighed in, so anyone who wants to share is welcome to jump in.
Having
Do
that.
y'all feel like, oh, go ahead, Betty. I was just
Sorry.
gonna say, do you feel like consulting is the pre-med of MBAs? It's like the thing that everybody thinks they want to do. Maybe not, but from our perspective, we see that a lot. Betty, go
Well,
ahead.
sometimes students want to come in doing something different and drink the Kool-Aid. They try out consulting in their internship and decide like, oh, maybe this wasn't for me after all. But it's really just having that one-on-one coaching with the student, really understanding what they're looking for. We do a career map journey with our students to really go in. It's more of a self-reflection tool, and asking them like, okay, where have you been? Where you're at now? Where do you want to go? Why do you want it? Why do you want consultings? What are your must-have? What are your need-to-haves? So that seems to help students as well. Other assessment tools that we use is Career Leader, depending on how they answer the questions. And there's no magic formula at the end of the day, but it is some sort of guideline to help students. And of course, Clifton Strengths. What their strengths are, how they can use their strengths and talent to consulting. Sometimes when I look at my students' strengths and I'm like, oh, maybe not so much consulting, right? Why don't we think about this area? Maybe it's a corporate strategy for them where they still have that flavor of consulting, but internally. So I think it's just really and asking those powerful questions, like what drives you towards consulting? What brought you here? Why do you want consulting?
Can you outline one actionable tip for job seekers to assess if they're a fit for consulting, as well as any final thoughts from the session? For this, we'll go in the reverse order that we started with. So Betty, if you'll go first from Rotman.
Yes, thank you. Wow. I think one actionable item that I would say is going back to the fit, but more the soft skills and that connection. I think that is what, echoing what Megan just finished saying, it's really important to know how you're demonstrating your skills, how you're building these relationships. Soft skills are so important as much as your hard skills. And that's really, in my opinion, what's going to determine your fit is your soft skills. You're right. You can do the cases and be so good at that. And then you're like, oh no, now I really got to shine through my personality.
It's so true. Amazing. Thanks. Randy, go ahead.
So I think you could ask yourself whether the case interview prep sounds like it would be fun, like an enjoyable experience or opportunity to show your ability to solve a bunch of puzzles, or whether it sounds like it would be a burden, like a brutal slog through stressful time to learn how to do something that you don't know how to do. And I think if you answer the question one way, you're a good fit. If you answer the other way, you might not be a good fit.
Such good insight. Thank you. Kellogg, Megan.
One of the things I like to kind of think about students is to do the self-assessment during the process. There are students who really like to do the networking aspect and they get really energized by that. And because they like doing that part, they end up dropping some of their case prep. And then there is a flip of students who really like the puzzles and solving the problems. And so then they spend a lot of time on the casing and then they don't end up getting interviews because they haven't done enough networking. And so I think it's trying to, be reflective of, your target list and how many people you've been talking to the firms and, thinking about, have I been talking to enough decision makers? Have I been talking to people who will remember me? And really continuing to assess, how things are going. It's a really big part of the process that I think sometimes students overlook, that they're being self-reflective during the process.
So good. Thanks, Megan. Scott, final words of wisdom.
Yeah, I mean, I think I always ask students, do you like to make decisions or do you like to influence them? Okay, because lots of students think, geez, I'm going to be a consultant. I'm going to tell the client what to do. Okay, and there's been a big shift in the last probably 8 to 10 years, and regardless if it's an MBB or the Big Four or any of the other consulting firms, they work more collaborative with clients. Okay, lots of times a client executive has brought you in to work with their management team to help them make a decision so that they own it when you walk out the door. Right. So I think it's a very important thing for people to understand that more and more as a consultant. Your goal is to help the client and influence the decision, provide them, lead the horse to water, but not necessarily shove their head into it. And if they're comfortable doing that and they're okay. And the exact role I give them is, would you be okay being Scottie Pippen? Okay. Because Jordan probably couldn't have got the rings without him. Okay. And as a consultant, you don't always get the glory. Okay. And some people need it. Okay. And if you do, consulting will be a very lonely career for you.
Good. Truth. Spoken very wisely. Thanks, Scott.
It is. Yes.
Joni, last
it
but
paged
not
me
least.
many a time. Trust me. Okay. Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. Joni, final words of wisdom.
Final words of wisdom. I would say we love a framework. We're in consulting. What are the 3 things? Like, let's do an honest assessment. What are I say 3 things that consultants are looking for? And so your actionable tip is to make sure that you have these and that you are demonstrating them. 1, analytical aptitude. Okay. Do you have that? And are you demonstrating that? Number 2, clear and concise communication. It is not just what you're saying, but how you're saying it. I knew Jenny was a consultant when we had our prep right before we came in here. She's like, here's what we're going to talk through. This is the order. These are the bullets. Like, she had her framework for how we were going to talk through things, and we could follow the path. And then finally, the last one is teamwork ability. So do you have analytical aptitude, clear and concise communication, and teamwork ability? Do you have that? And are you able to demonstrate that? And part of how you demonstrate that is through the storytelling. And, we've talked about that already. So that's my kind of actionable tip.
Amazing. I just want to say thank you so much to all of the panelists. You gave not just great advice, but also clear stories and interesting insights. For anybody who has been on the call today, thank you for joining us. We hope that you found the information incredibly valuable. We will send out a recording of the call so you can access the information and the details that were shared. But once again, thank you, everyone, panelists and audience, for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you for listening to Strategy Simplified. If you're enjoying the show, please leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to help elevate us in those podcast rankings and tell the podcast platforms that people want to hear from us. Thank you for tuning in. We'll catch you again on the flip side.